It's 9 o'clock at WWRR Scranton Wilkes-Barre. This is a Decades Artist Spotlight.
Hi, it's Rick Richards from the Georgia Satellites.
My honey, my baby, don't put my love up on no shelf. She said don't hand me no lines and keep your hands to yourself.
Hey everybody, this is Jerry Graham from Honeymoon Suite.
I got a new girl now.
Hi, this is Neil Dowdy of REO Speedwagon.
This is Decades, Joey Kramer.
And you're listening to Decades with Joey Kramer.
And you're listening to Decades with Joey Kramer.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight this week, and we got to welcome back to the show the frontman, the lead singer, the founder of a little group called Men Without Hats. We all know them in the 1980s for their Gigundo hits, The Safety Dance, but they were a whole lot more. They're back out there on tour in a Retro Futura tour, and we're going to have Ivan Doroschuk with us tonight, the lead singer, back to the show. So sit back and enjoy. The Decades Artist Spotlight is next, but first, of course, it is The Safety Dance.
Yes. Safe dance.
We can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind. Cause your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, well, they're no friends of mine. I say, we can go where we want to, a place where they will never find. And we can act like we come from out of this world, leave the real one far behind. And we can dance. We can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind. Cause your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, well, they're no friends of mine. Say, we can go where we want to, place where they will never find. And we can act like we come from out of this world, leave the real one far behind. We can dance. We can go when we want to. Night is young and so am I. And we can dress real neat from our hands to our feet and surprise them with a victory cry. Say, we can act if we want to. If we don't, nobody will. And you can act real rude and totally removed, and I can act like an imbecile. And say, we can dance, everything's out of control. We can dance, they're doing it from pole to pole. We can dance, everybody look at your hands. We can dance, everybody's taking the chance. Safe to dance, oh, it's safe to dance. Yes, it's safe to dance.
Sit down.
We can dance if we want to. We've got all your life in mind. As long as we abuse it, never gonna lose it. Everything will work out right. I say we can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind. Cause your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, well, they're no friends of mine. I say we can dance, everything's out of control. We can dance, we're doing it from pole to pole. We can dance, everybody look at your hands. We can dance, everybody's making a chance. Well, it's safe to dance, yes, it's safe to dance. Well, it's safe to dance, well, it's safe to dance. Yes, it's safe to dance, it's safe to dance. Yeah. Well, it's safe to dance, it's safe to dance. Oh, it's safe to dance, oh, it's safe to dance. Oh, it's safe to dance, oh, it's safe to dance.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight with Joe E. Kramer, this week's artist.
It is another Decades Artist Spotlight, and tonight we welcome back to the show singer, songwriter, lead vocalist, and of course founder of the Canadian rock band Men Without Hats, rock synth band, I should say, Ivan Doroschuk. Did I get that name right again?
Yeah, right on.
So 35 years. I mean, last time we talked, it was 2012, and you just had your first album come out in, quite a while. And Love in the Age of War, but now it's like the 35th anniversary of Rhythm of Youth and, of course, the Safety Dance.
Yep. And we're celebrating it by going out on tour with Howard Jones this summer and the Retro Futura tour and playing a lot of those songs, playing a lot of the songs off the album.
And does it feel like 35 years? I mean, God, who would have thought 35 years later you'd still be out there, doing the Safety Dance?
Hey, I'm blessed. I mean, I'm so fortunate that people are still listening to it and still dancing to it and giving me the opportunity to go out and play it for them.
And I'm a big guy, and I love acoustic versions. I love stuff that's stripped down. And I saw on YouTube you did an acoustic version of it. I think about 2 years ago. The clip that was on it was from Boston. Did you ever think of actually recording an acoustic version of Safety Dance, or is there one out there?
Yeah, we were thinking of recording it. We might be going into studio pretty soon to do just that. So it's one of our future projects.
And an acoustic version of Pop Goes the World, of course.
Yeah, B-side.
Another great song, obviously. All right, before we get into the heart of the interview here, I mean, a little brief history. Men Without Hats has had a lot of members over the years, but going back to the beginning, just give a brief history, not only of yourself, well, what led to the forming of Men Without Hats?
Well, I grew up in the 70s. I was, a child of the heavy metal generation, kind of. And,
right.
But for me, I think new wave happened. It was a combination of disco and progressive rock. I think that led me to the 80s. That brought me to the 80s and made me ready to be in a new wave band. Because that's what it kind of was for me. It was a combination of synthesizers and dance music, which was happening at the end of the 70s, coupled with the fact that I grew up taking piano lessons all my life. My mother was a music teacher at McGill University in Montreal, and so I was surrounded by music, and that was it. I was front and center on the disco scene in the late 70s, and Montreal was a big prog rock city for the prog rock scene. It was big on Genesis and Pink Floyd and King Crimson and Yes and all those bands. So it was a blend of that, a blend of the French culture that happened in Montreal, and all of that came to a head in the 80s. And I was studying communications at McGill University, and it's where I met a bunch of musicians, and we decided to form a punk band, form a rock band, just like everybody else was doing. And it was a new explosion of everything. Video was new, music was new, clothes were new, hairstyles were new. Everything was a fresh start. So it was a lot of fun.
And it's weird because I remember in the early 80s, we went from, turning the radio on, hearing Kenny Rogers and Barbra Streisand. Not that there's anything wrong with Kenny Rogers or Barbra Streisand, but it was like the flip of a switch. From that, you were hearing stuff like, Devo and Men Without Hats and A Flock of Seagulls. And the music just flipped.
Well, that was it. It was, that's exactly, that's basically where the idea for the song Safety Dance came from, because we were still going to discotheques, and it was the dying days of disco at the end of the 70s, and the DJs were starting to mix in the odd new wave song, so they, now and then you'd hear Blondie, Heart of Glass, you'd hear Rock Lobster by the B-52s, and we'd get up on we'd get up on the dance floor and start pogoing,
Right.
jumping up and down, and doing the sort of the precursor to the mosh pit.
Right.
You know, the bouncers and the club owners never seen anything like it. They didn't know what it was, and they'd toss us out. And so that's basically where the idea for Safety Dance, that we could dance if we wanted to, and this is the new music was ours, and it was coming in, and there was no stopping it.
And it's funny because when I read all about pogoing, whenever you look up Men Without Hats, and if you look up the actual meaning of it, it's hysterical because it says keeping their torsos rigid or thrashing them about, holding their arms stiffly at their sides or flaying them, and keeping their legs together or kicking about while jumping in any direction.
Yeah. And so for the people who are still like trying to do the disco two-step to Barry White, this was pretty confusing. They thought they were we were out to hurt them basically. And so
And how was the support from your family? Like you said, your mother was into the business. Now your brothers were in the band originally. Did you get a lot of support when you decided, hey, we're going to do this band, we're going to go for it?
Oh yeah. I remember our first show in Montreal when we were still. This was because before we were a synth band, we were a guitar punk band. We were doing Cramps covers and Contortions covers and all kinds of stuff, and Chris Spedding songs. And we played in a punk club down in old Montreal. And I told my parents. My parents wanted to come. My mom's loved. My dad was a musician too. And they wanted to come, and I said, no, I don't want you to come here because it's a punk rock thing, and there's going to be a lot of violence, and there's going to be a lot of punk rockers, and it's going to be like, I just don't want you to come. It's going to be too dangerous. And so I was up on stage doing our set and everything like that, and the crowd was getting into it and everything like that. And I looked to the back of the room, and I noticed the back door. I could see my parents' heads poking in the back door. They had come anyway, and they were there watching our first. They saw our first ever show. Professional show,
That's great because a lot of artists I talked to didn't have that support.
No, we had it all the time. I mean, if I'm still doing it, it's largely due to my parents, and no, it was great. We grew up, like I say, I grew up in a musical household that we were surrounded by instruments. My dad was an amateur musician as well, and he played he and his dad played in a sort of a country western band, a dance band. They'd play the Saturday night dances at the barn dances, but he backed up musicians who would come through town, and he and his dad would be the backing band, and he got to back up guys like Hank Williams and Hank Snow and a lot of famous people
right.
that went through a little town of nowhere, Manitoba. So it was a good. Like I say, once again, I was surrounded by music and had a lot of support.
Talk a little bit about you were in Montreal. The Montreal music scene was a little different because if you went to Toronto, it was a very corporate type of area, but Montreal was very different.
Yeah, Montreal was really different because it was a real sort of French-English thing, and one of the main things, the difference between Montreal and Toronto, was that all the record labels were in Toronto. And there was absolutely no record industry happening in Montreal, which made the scene a lot more experimental because people who were making music in Montreal didn't have that pressure that the Toronto bands had, where everybody was trying to sound like the latest band that had just been signed, and everybody was kind of chasing that corporate carrot. Montreal didn't have that. Montreal knew that when they were doing the sign, there was no fat cat in the crowd with a cigar and a wad full of cash ready to sign you. So we could do whatever we wanted. We could really we really pushed the envelope in Montreal. So Montreal's scene was a lot like more experimental, a lot more daring. It was a lot wilder than what was happening in the rest of the country, which is why Montreal became kind of like New York in the States, where New York is kind of like the place where everybody heads to New York to kind of make it. Montreal was kind of a place where musicians had to kind of spend some time in Montreal as part of their CV to make them kind of legit. It had a really sort of burgeoning. A lot of bands came from here. Arcade Fire, like Celine Dion is the biggest star in the world still.
Right.
There was like all the way back to Gino Vanelli, Corey Hart. Montreal has had a lot of big acts. It's a cool place to come from.
And of course, the story of a lot of bands, you were rejected by like almost every label before you actually got signed.
Exactly. No. Our first record, Rhythm of Youth, was put out in Canada as an import. It was first released in Canada as an import, and then we were signed. It was distributed by a Canadian company that had rejected us. they ended up having to distribute us anyway because they were distributing the British label that we had signed to. And we were. I mean, Safety Dance. When we first released Safety Dance, it never even went top 10 in Canada.
Yeah, I remember it wasn't a big hit anywhere, and I remember you telling the story, and you could elaborate on this, that you were actually ready to make a second album when the Safety Dance, it kicked in, and you had to get back and go on tour.
Well, that's it. One of the last things we did for that record was make a 12-inch. They told us you got to go make a 12-inch of Safety Dance, and we sort of knew what it was to make a 12-inch. The other people were doing it, so we kind of did our research and did our homework and came up with this 12-inch. And then we went back in the studio to do the second record. We were pleased with what had happened with the first one. We'd gotten a deal, which is like, wow, and when they put us in the studio, made a record, we actually made a record, and our record was playing on the radio. Like, we didn't care what the number chart, we didn't care how many we'd sold. We were just so stoked that we actually were making records and being in studios and getting to do shows and that was our dream come true. And so we just headed into the studio, happy to be making our second record. And then that 12-inch that we had kind of made and forgotten about hit number one on the Billboard dance charts, and we had to go out there and start all over again and start promoting the record, and that's when the real work started. So it was a weird story. And then then trying to finish that record a year and a half later, coming back to those tracks that you had left, and being told by the record company, just go back there and finish it. And we were different people. We were different. Like, everything had changed in our world. And so that record got finished in a funny kind of way too. So it's all rock and roll though, and it's all good.
Somebody told me to live is a lie. Well, I know better. Got a woman inside, tells me things that I should understand. 'Cause I know better, even though I'm a man. So many things go in so many ways. Every single moment like a judgment day. Thank goodness things are getting better for sure. I got the message. Love is the cure. Message is you. Somebody told me that we live in a dream. Sounds like something that you hear on TV. Got everything, even though I'm a guy. Feels so good, I got a woman inside. Ooh, yeah. I said, hey, man, quit pushing your women round. I said, hey, got more rock and roll than we ever deserved. Some of us were fishes, some of us were worms. We got more rock and roll than we ever deserved. Some of us were fishes, some of us were worms. Take it away, Ermways.
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight. Ivan Doroschuk. I always pronounce it different all the time. It's hard. It's a hard name. He's from Canada. Of course, the band is Men Without Hats. That song right there is Hey Men. The Adventures of Women and Men Without Hate in the 21st Century was the album song that went to number 8 in Canada. And just like a lot of these artists, and I always hate when people say, for instance. One hit and never heard from them again. Aha was a band that sold 100 million albums worldwide. So was like Falco, who did Rock Me Amadeus, 75 million albums worldwide. OMD, which we're going to have Andy McCluskey on the show, sold 75 million albums worldwide. And, of course, Men Without Hats, who sold 15 million albums worldwide. Even though they only had 2 hits here in the States, they were huge in Canada. And they were also very popular in Austria, New Zealand, Australia, stuff like that. A lot of dance hits here in the States also. So more with Ivan coming up. And we're going to play their second big hit in the States in 1987, 5 years after the Safety Dance. This is the Decades Artist Spotlight. Right here, it's Decades on Total Reach Radio, 105 The River, 104.9 and 100.7 FM, 1340 AM and around the world at 105theriver.net and Decades with JoeEKramer.com. More with Ivan Doroschuk from Men Without Hats right here on Decades.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight.
Northeast PA's 105 The River.
Johnny played guitar, Jenny played bass. The name of the band
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight. Ivan Doroschuk from Men Without Hats is with us. So let's get back to it with part 2 of our interview. Ivan Doroschuk from Men Without Hats. What you were able to put in folk of the 80s, you had to go back and then, like you said, return 2 or 3 years later and finish an album.
Yeah, that's it. So that's these were songs that we had started before we had before the whole thing had blown up, and it was just we were young. It was record companies. It was just a whole thing. This is it's something. It's unfortunately something that's it's kind of a dying art now, and what I'm noticing now is a lot of bands aren't going to get that chance that we had, and that's one of the things that I think is kind of sad that all those studios are closing, and all those bands now make records on laptops in somebody's living room, and they don't know that they think it's the same thing. They think everything's happening. They don't understand that I made records. I made records in the same room that David Bowie and John Lennon made records, and with some of the same guys that were behind the board, who told me stories about about working with them and the tricks that they had, and the way they just all these stories are lost now. It's all about some guy's laptop in his room, But any kid, you get the right software, and you can make some beats up, and you could have your own little, you could record a song. It's not that difficult. Well, I think the mystery's kind of gone out of the whole thing now, and like everybody can, like before you had to earn your tattoos. Now you can just go buy them like ready-made at the store. So the little girl working at the Thrifty's food store is got full sleeve tattoos where In my days, it was the Yakuza, the Hells Angels, the sailors, and the prisoners that had tattoos, and everything's accessible to everybody now. You want to look like a rock star, you go online, you can find out where they got their boots, where they got their jacket, where they get their rings, where they get their tattoos, and everybody looks like a rock star. And that was one of the. That's one of the things that's dying too. Not only the studios are gone and all the people working and everything and the big budgets and everything like that, but even the look of being a rock star is gone now, because everybody's rocking this T-shirt, and everybody's walking around with lanyards like they're backstage, got some backstage pass to life or something, and and so that's it. So it's lost its cachet. And the crowd, the facts are there too. Like Bruce Springsteen, still the boomer crowd. Bruce Springsteen made I don't know how much, twice as much money as Justin Bieber doing half as many shows last year.
It's unreal.
And so once the boomer crowd is gone, that's it. There's not the arena rock type of trip is. It'll still be there, for the Ariana Grandes and the huge kind of Katy Perrys and stuff like that, but. The rest of the stuff, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to sustain itself. It's not. It doesn't have that. Like I say, it doesn't have that cachet anymore. It's not that organ of resistance that it used to be.
So in '87, Pop Goes the World comes out, which it's 5 years now since the Safety Dance, but it seems like, did you take a little more time to do that record, because Pop Goes the World was like a sequel to the Safety Dance, and everybody just ate it right up.
Yeah, no, well, we wanted to try something with Pop Goes the World. It was like an attempt to try and see how organic I could make an electronic band sound.
Right.
And so that's what I went. I went with the whole full symphonic route with the synthesizers, and I was relying on my past with having grown up as a child of the '70s. Growing up with concept albums with Pink Floyd and Genesis, and so that's what I tried there, and it was just another adventure. It was another sort of chapter in the. And
it was a good album too. Moonbeam was a song that I actually play in my show, because I play the hits, but I love playing the tracks that didn't get a lot of play here in America, and. Yeah. Moonbeam was one of them. That was, it was a dance song here in the States, but it wasn't really a radio song. But the album's full with tracks that could have probably been played on the radio.
Yeah, no, that's it. And so it was just another question of getting caught up in the whirlwind of the executive turntable, and those days were the I don't know. They were pretty exciting days, the '80s for music. But it was a big time in a big time because big changes were coming in the industry, and so this was kind of like it was just before the shit hit the fan type of thing, you know, and so things were pretty wild, and people were making their last big deals, and you know, just start doing everything before the ship went down, kind of thing, almost, you know, in the '80s. And you know, the '90s gave what they gave, you know, and that scene, and then it kind of all just sort of in the new millennium, it's just been a different world almost, you know.
Yeah, I don't quite understand the music of today, and I talk to my wife about it all the time. I'm like, you know, is it that I'm getting old, or is it that, you know, it just everything sounds the same to me? It doesn't have that substance that. And there's people who say '80s music, oh, that was just senseless, but those songs are remembered. I mean, you don't hear that about the '90s. You hear that about the '80s.
Because they're still songs, you know. They were still, even though, like, one of my theories is that the '80s are still around because it's a dance music,
right?
And this is one of the reasons that disco is kind of really big. You have '70s nights, you have '80s nights. I mean, you know, but you don't really have any '90s nights because it was kind of a downer.
Yeah,
you know?
Just a little bit.
And so, like, the '80s, but the '80s also had songs. They had, you know, and we're on tour with Howard Jones, and every time he plays, I'm I'm amazed. Like, I'm saying, that's why this guy's still around. That's why the people are still coming, because his songs have got memorable songs, you know.
They all have a hook. Songs today do not have a hook.
I mean, tell me how many Kanye West songs you're going to be singing around the campfire in 20 years, you know?
I always say that. People say to me, so in like 15 years, are you going to be playing like Justin Bieber and Kanye West? I'm like, hopefully in 15 years. I won't be. I can't even imagine playing that stuff on my show.
You know, like, I mean, I can't even. You can't sing these songs. You can't hum them. They're all guys just talking about how cool they are and just, you know, bragging. And I just don't know why people haven't. You know, like, we especially since we went through such a PC culture for the last.
Oh God, you can't say anything without being thrown under the bus.
But somehow these rap bands got away with it.
Yep.
You know. It's such a double standard, and and it's kind of like, you know, you look at America now, and you look at the youth culture in America, and it's still a pimp and hoe culture, and it's still a rape culture, and it's like, and I think it's largely due to the music, you know. That's largely due to the music culture that's going on there too, you know. Guys are trying to look like gangsters. Everybody's gangster this, gangster that, and it's, you know, the N-word this, N-word that. You know, it's like, I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong, but, you know.
I have this fight all the time, so you're not the only one.
Yeah.
Believe me. Loving the Age of War. I mean, 2012, that was out. You talk about a synth album. I mean, if you're a hardcore Men Without Hats fan, this was the album right from Devil Come Round. I mean, synthesizers galore, and it sounded like classic Men Without Hats. It sounded like a follow-up to Rhythm of Youth. I mean, that's.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, I've said this before. You know, it's. We went in there. Dave Rave and I went in there with the express purpose of making a record that sounded like it was recorded the week after Safety Dance,
right.
The week after Rhythm of Youth. We didn't want, and I think we I've said this too. I think we made the record that our fans wanted us to make. We didn't make a dubstep record. We didn't make a rave record. We didn't like a hardcore techno record. We didn't try to keep up with the times. We went and did what we did best. We didn't try and reinvent the wheel. We just went back and got all the synths that we used to use and used the kind of technology that we used back then. And I still write the same kind of songs when I'm in the mood, you know. And it was a fun project. That's one of the main things. It was an exciting project. And that's one of the things Rhythm of Youth had too. It had an innocence, but it had an element of fun too. It was like I said, we were so excited about being in the studio. It was just like we couldn't believe it, you know, that somebody actually liked our music enough to give us money to record, you know, more songs. It was just like, wow, you know, how did we luck out this much, you know?
And in the age of people releasing singles and not albums, do you see yourself, you know, not maybe next year, but eventually putting out another CD? Do you still enjoy making new music?
I don't. Well, I write. The way I write is I watershed. Like, I wrote that whole album like all at once, like that last record. And it usually comes at times when there's some kind of major change happening in my life, and that was what was going on in there and around Love in the Age of War. Everything was kind of changing in my life. I was getting back on the road, getting back in the band. I had just gotten a divorce. I was everything was around me was changing, and it was really that was the catalyst for writing the album. And that seems to be, I haven't written that many albums, and I've only made like 5 or 6 records in my life, and it seems that that's how I operate. I sort of build up all this stuff inside me until there's a sort of a cataclysmic event that sort of just sets everything off, and I write songs. But my life has been going so good lately, I haven't really had anything to write about, It's like, that's my problem. I just, I can't sit around and write songs like I don't know, like Sting writing songs about his castle and that,
Probably because you don't have a castle.
Yeah, one of the reasons is I don't have a castle.
Right.
Yeah, but I just don't. I'm not there. I guess I write songs when I feel I need to write songs, and that's it.
And go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying I don't sit around every day, and like different people work different ways. Some people just like set aside a special amount of time every day, and they go and they work on their craft, which it is a craft, and I appreciate that, and I totally respect it. But different people work different ways, and I'm just not one of those guys who sits away and plugs away at songs all day and stuff like that. I write them when there's so many inside me that I just got to sit down and get them out of me and move on.
And you touched on it before, and before we wrap things up here, the Retro Futura Tour 2017. This is not just a weekend thing, ladies and gentlemen. This is a bona fide tour. Howard Jones, Katrina and the Waves, Modern English, Paul Young, The English Beat, Annabelle Lewin from who's the voice of Bow Wow Wow, and that's the way you want to hear it. You're starting off July 2nd, and you're in your hometown of Montreal, and you're going right through the summer.
Yeah, we're doing 6 weeks. We're doing 2 weeks in Quebec and Ontario, and then 4 weeks with Howard and the crew in the States. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait.
I mean, nowadays you want to get a bang for your buck, and when you can go to see a concert that's going to bring back that many memories, with yourself and with Howard Jones and with Katrina and the Waves and think of all the hits that are just in the in that group.
Oh yeah, no, we've been doing these for a few years now, and the people love it. I mean, they're just getting better and better and better, and because people are having so much fun, and that's exactly the reason why. You just see so many songs, you hear so many hits in such a short period of time that you can't go wrong.
And it's great going back to Montreal, I guess, with a tour like this.
Yeah, we're going to be doing we're doing a big, huge Canada Day, July 1st Canada Day show in Montreal. It's going to be just massive. We're doing it with Carly Rae Jepsen. It's going to be fun.
We're on a Decades Artist Spotlight. Ivan Doroschuk, he is the frontman, the founder, the voice of Men Without Hats. Ivan, as always, I mean, we have to do this more often than every couple years. You're great to have on the show. We love Men Without Hats, and they're going to be coming to a town near you this summer. It's going to be a great summer.
It's going to be fun. We're going to have a blast. Hey, everybody, this is Ivan from Men Without Hats, and you're listening to Decades with Joey Kramer.
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on Decades Artist Spotlight. Ivan Doroschuk from Men Without Hassle with us tonight. Got to thank Ivan, of course, for joining us. As always, it is a pleasure. You can check out the interview online. I'll have it up there early this week. Just go to decadeswithjoeykramer.com, link it right from there onto Spreaker.com. Now, coming up in 2 weeks, man, we're already coming to the end of August. It is truly unbelievable how fast everything's going. But August 26th, we will have Robert Mason here from the band Warrants returning to the show. So Robert Mason in 2 weeks, and then we're going to do a couple in a row. Just to give you an idea, Jade Starling from Pretty Poison, Paul Young, who is also on that Retro Futura tour, Mike Peters from the band The Alarm, which I really love, Mike Score from A Flock of Seagulls will be with us, and Andy McCluskey, the front man for Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, OMD, If You Leave, and more, all coming up on the Decades Artist Spotlight. We got more decades coming up. Don't you go anywhere. This is Decades on Total Reach Radio, 105 The River, 104.9 and 100.7 FM, 1340 AM, and around the world at 105theriver.net, Decades with JoeyKramer.com, and the Radio Bold app to your iPhone or Android device. More Decades coming up.